With trembling hands clutching foreclosure papers and a photo of his deceased parents, Jackson Hayes gazed up at the rusted gate of Clearwater Regional Airport. He had spent his last $700 buying this abandoned property at a county auction. Desperate for both a fresh start and a place to live after losing his family ranch, little did he know that behind a locked panel in an old maintenance hangar lay classified documents from long-forgotten military operations, protocols that would not only reopen investigations into a decades-old national security breach, but would thrust him into a dangerous game of cat and mouse between determined federal agents, corrupt defense contractors, and the real traitors who had evaded justice for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late September wind whistled through broken windows as Jackson followed County Clerk Melissa Turner across the cracked tarmac of what was now his property. The once busy regional airport had been the transportation hub of Clearwater County. Its modest terminal and 3 hangars had served crop dusters, private pilots, and small commercial flights. Now, after sitting vacant for nearly a decade, it stood as a ghost of its former self, a monument to rural decline and forgotten dreams. His worn boots echoed on the concrete floor of the main hangar, now dulled by years of abandonment. Cobwebs stretched between ceiling beams, and the once bustling maintenance areas were blanketed in a thick layer of dust. Faded safety warnings peeled in corners where water damage had taken its toll, and the lingering scent of aviation fuel mingled with mustiness and decay. As I mentioned during the auction, the property is being sold as is, Melissa said, her voice bouncing off the high ceiling. Clearwater Regional closed in 2014 after the military satellite station next door was decommissioned. The county seized it for back taxes 5 years ago. Honestly, we're just happy someone's taking it off our hands. Jackson nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. Just 8 months ago, he had been a 4th-generation cattle rancher in Montana, working the land. His great-grandfather had homesteaded. Then came the drought, the cattle disease, and finally, the bank calling in loans his parents had taken out before their death in a car accident 2 years prior. The creditors had taken everything. The sprawling ranch, his equipment, even his grandfather's vintage truck. The location isn't terrible, Melissa continued, trying to sound encouraging. Clearwater Township has seen better days, but there's talk of revitalization. The old manager's quarters above the terminal might be habitable with some work. And the utilities? Jackson asked, running his hand along a dusty control panel. Water and electric are still connected to the grid, though you'll need to set up accounts. The plumbing might need work. Buildings this old always do. She hesitated. Look, I know you got this place for a steal, but are you sure about this? A man alone in an abandoned airport in the middle of nowhere? Jackson straightened his back. I've rebuilt engines, repaired farm equipment, and renovated my parents' house. Ms. Turner, I've worked with my hands my whole life, and after what I've been through this past year, an old airport doesn't scare. Me, this is what I can afford. What he didn't say was that his savings had been depleted by funeral costs and legal battles with the bank. The small town of Clearwater, 3 hours from his former Montana ranch, offered the only property he could afford, this forgotten airfield. Purchased for the price of 1 decent saddle, Melissa handed him a ring of brass keys. Main gate terminal. Door, hangar access, and these smaller ones for various storage rooms. The underground maintenance bay is beneath Hangar C. Probably best to keep that locked. Some of the old equipment is still down there. Jackson took the keys, his trained eye noticing the distinctive Air Force markings on the key ring. Thank you. I can manage from here. Take your time looking around. I have other appointments, so I'll head out. Town hall's open weekdays if you need anything. Melissa seemed relieved to leave, the emptiness of the airport clearly making her uncomfortable. Alone in what would become both his home and his fresh start, Jackson moved through the cavernous main hangar like a mechanic examining a new workshop. The maintenance bays with their abandoned tools. The small office with its dusty logbook still in place. The fuel storage area with its heavy safety doors still intact. His experienced eyes saw past the decay to the facility's bones, solid, practical, built to last. The steel framework, the reinforced concrete, the professional-grade electrical systems, all treasures waiting to be restored by someone who understood their value. He made his way to the terminal building and up to the airport manager's former apartment, a surprisingly spacious 5-room residence with large windows overlooking the runway. The furniture was gone, but the fixtures remained: a walk-in shower in the bathroom, industrial sinks in the kitchen, built-in shelving, and what had once been a communications room. With cleaning and minor repairs, it could be livable within days. As he stood by the window, watching clouds race across the vast Montana sky, Jackson felt the weight of the past year pressing down on him. The drought that had decimated his herd, the mysterious cattle disease that followed, the devastating discovery of their financial ruin, the humiliation of foreclosure, the pitying looks from former friends as he sold off generations of family possessions just to survive. His phone chimed with an incoming call. The screen showed Montana Agricultural Association, his former employer. For a moment, hope fluttered in his chest, but he quickly suppressed it. They had made their position clear when his ranch had failed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jackson Hayes speaking, he answered, keeping his voice professional. Jackson, it's Director Thompson. The association director's voice was as crisp as ever. I'm just checking in. Martinez mentioned you'd left Montana. Something about buying property in, where was it? Clearwater, Jackson replied. Yes, I've purchased an old airport here. I'm standing in it right now. Clearwater? Isn't that where that military incident happened in the 90s? What on earth possessed you to move there? Jackson didn't mention that his bankruptcy, considered a failure in Montana's tight-knit ranching community, had effectively ended his professional prospects there. Thompson himself had suggested Jackson take time to regroup rather than embarrass the association with his financial troubles. It's a change of pace, Jackson said neutrally. The property has potential. Good bones, lots of space. Well, Thompson's voice held a note of condescension. When you're ready to return to serious work, let me know. We could possibly find something for you in the education department, more suitable for someone in your circumstances. After ending the call, Jackson let out a long breath, fighting back the anger that threatened to boil over. From respected fourth-generation rancher and agricultural consultant to relegated to teaching school children about farming, all because forces beyond his control had conspired against his family's legacy. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jackson made his way to the third hangar. He hadn't yet explored the most intriguing feature of his new property, the underground maintenance bay. Following the main corridor to the rear of the building, he found a narrow staircase leading to the lower level. The temperature dropped noticeably as he descended. Unlike the rest of the airport, the underground level showed no signs of water damage or significant deterioration. Its concrete walls and floors had been built to withstand the passage of time and the specific requirements of aircraft maintenance. Jackson flipped a switch, surprised when fluorescent fixtures flickered to life overhead. The maintenance bay dominated the space, industrial and austere. Heavy-duty lifts still in place, drainage systems built into the slightly sloped floor. Metal cabinets lined one wall, likely once containing tools and aircraft parts. As a former ranch manager responsible for maintaining heavy equipment, Jackson had seen many mechanical shops. But there was something uniquely interesting about standing in a space where aircraft had been serviced and prepared for flight. Not frightening exactly, but somehow inspiring, a monument to human ingenuity and aviation. On the far wall, partially concealed behind a rolling tool chest, he noticed something unexpected, what appeared to be a door, its outline barely visible beneath multiple coats of paint. "Now that's interesting," he murmured, examining the hidden entrance. He pushed the heavy cabinet aside, revealing a small vault-like door with a sophisticated electronic keypad that still showed a faint power indicator light. It appeared to be military-grade, suggesting this hidden room had been part of the airport's design during its connection to the nearby military installation. But why would a regional airport need a high-security vault? Classified maintenance. Records, perhaps, or something else entirely. Jackson checked his watch. Too late to do anything more today. He needed to bring his belongings from the motel, purchase cleaning supplies, and begin making the apartment habitable. The underground bay's mysteries would have to wait. That night, lying on a sleeping bag in what would become his bedroom, Jackson scrolled through his phone, researching Clearwater Regional Airport. Most articles focused on its operational history, serving the region from 1962 until its closure in 2014. One detail caught his attention. During the 1980s and 90s, the airport had been unofficially connected to the adjacent Clearwater Military Satellite Station, serving as a secondary transportation hub for personnel and equipment. One paragraph mentioned an incident in 1997 that had led to the satellite station being temporarily placed under heightened security, though details were sparse. The station commander at that time, Colonel Richard Blackwood, had apparently worked closely with the airport management during the security review. Military connections, Jackson whispered to himself. His curiosity piqued. Could the vault in the maintenance bay be related to the satellite station? If the vault had remained sealed since the airport's closure, might it still contain materials from that era? Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams vivid and unsettling, standing before the vault as its doors slowly swung open, revealing shelves of classified documents and electronic equipment marked with military insignia. He woke at dawn, the dream so real he half expected to find security clearance badges clutched in his hands. After a simple breakfast, Jackson drove to the local hardware store, purchasing cleaning supplies, basic tools, and an electronics repair kit. If the underground vault had a still active keypad, his experience fixing farm equipment might help him bypass the lock system. The morning passed in a flurry of cleaning, sweeping decades of dust from the apartment, scrubbing fixtures, wiping windows to let in more light. By afternoon, exhausted but satisfied, Jackson returned his attention to the underground vault. The electronic keypad offered little immediate help. The system was sophisticated and clearly designed to prevent tampering. He tried several likely combinations with no success. Think logically, he told himself, applying his problem-solving mindset. What combination might the military have used? Dates of significance, the facility's commissioning, standard military sequences. As he worked, an elderly man appeared at the airport's front gate, peering through the chain link. Jackson approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man smiled warmly, his weathered face mapping decades under the Montana sun. "Name's Frank Donovan. Heard someone finally bought the old Clearwater Airport. Thought I'd welcome you to the county." Jackson introduced himself instinctively, liking the old man's genuine manner. "I worked here, you know," Frank said, gazing around the tarmac with misty eyes. 36 years as head of ground maintenance. Started just after the satellite station was built in '64. Those were interesting days for Clearwater. "The satellite station?" Jackson asked, excitement rising. The facility had been mentioned in his research. Frank nodded. "Military communications hub. Top secret in its day, though everybody knew what it was. Officially just a relay station, but we all knew they were monitoring Soviet transmissions. During the Cold War, the station and airport worked hand in hand for decades. "Were you here during the incident in '97? Jackson asked. Frank's expression darkened. "Bad business, that. Security breach of some kind. Military police everywhere for weeks. Colonel Blackwood nearly lost his mind trying to contain whatever happened." This revelation sent Jackson's mind racing. "Mr. Donovan, there's a vault in the underground maintenance bay. Would you know anything about it?" Frank's eyes widened. "You found that? The secure room?" He lowered his voice though. No one else was around. "That was Colonel Blackwood's private facility. Called it his contingency room. I never knew what was inside. Only the colonel and his executive officer had access. The vault is still locked. I have keys to the hangar, but not the combination to the electronic keypad." Frank frowned, thinking, "Well, for the maintenance bay, we always use the airport's founding date as the master key minus 1962. But the secure room, that would have been something military, known only to Blackwood and his people." Jackson's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of historical detail he needed. "Would you mind if I tried some combinations while you're here? Maybe you'll remember something that helps." Together, they moved to the underground bay. Frank visibly brightened as they entered. "Man, this takes me back," he said, running his hand along a workbench. "Kept this place spotless for nearly 4 decades. Aircraft maintenance is no place for cutting corners." Jackson examined the keypad more carefully in Frank's presence. "It's a 6-digit sequence most likely. Any idea what Colonel Blackwood might have used?" Blackwood was obsessed with Cold War history, Frank recalled. The Cuban Missile Crisis was like a religion to him. October 16, 19621011662. That crisis changed everything for installations like ours. Jackson carefully entered the sequence. 1-0-1-6-6-2. He held his breath as the last digit was entered. A small red light continued to blink. Nothing happened. "Worth a try," Frank sighed. Blackwood must have used something else. As Frank prepared to leave, he paused thoughtfully. "You know, there was something odd after the '97 incident." Blackwood became fixated on security protocols. Started keeping his own records separate from official channels. Became convinced that someone inside the military was working against American interests. This piqued Jackson's professional interest. "What kind of records?" "Communications logs, personnel files, security reports. Things the Pentagon sent, but weren't included in the official station record." Blackwood believed the '97 breach was connected to something bigger, something involving people high up in the Defense Department, but he could never prove it. After Frank left, Jackson couldn't stop thinking about the vault and Colonel Blackwood's unofficial investigation. If Blackwood had indeed kept hidden files on a security breach that was never fully explained, those documents could be of significant historical value and potentially explosive if they implicated people who had escaped. Accountability. That evening, as wind howled across the airfield, Jackson researched the 1997 incident and the Clearwater satellite station. News articles described a security review following procedural irregularities at the station. The military had pursued an internal investigation but had never released findings. The case had gone quiet in 1998 when Colonel Blackwood was reassigned to the Pentagon, and the station continued operations under new leadership until its decommissioning. In 2014, one detail stood out. The lead security officer assigned to the investigation was Lieutenant Michael Blackwood, the colonel's son. This family connection explained the airport's involvement, but also raised questions. Had the Blackwoods discovered something they couldn't safely reveal? Something now locked in the underground vault? Could it be that simple? Jackson murmured. Moving back to the vault, he tried a new combination, the date of the security breach, which he had found mentioned in an article about the military investigation, the 8th of July 97. The mechanism remained unyielding. Frustrated but not defeated, Jackson spent the next day settling into his new home. A local second-hand store provided basic furniture, a real bed, a table, chairs. He met several neighbors, all curious about the newcomer who had bought the old airport. Places probably filled with government secrets, commented one elderly woman at the grocery store, eyeing Jackson with concern. Not sure I'd want to live there alone. Returning to the airport that afternoon, Jackson was surprised to find a sleek black SUV parked outside. A man in an expensive suit stood at the entrance, checking his watch impatiently. "Mr. Hayes," he called as Jackson approached. "Alex Reynolds, representing Clearwater Development Corporation. I understand you've recently acquired this property." Jackson nodded cautiously, unlocking the gate. "Just 3 days ago." Reynolds followed him inside without waiting for an invitation. "Our company specializes in repurposing underutilized properties in rural areas. We've had our eye on this airfield for some time, but missed the auction notice. I'm authorized to offer you $50,000, a substantial profit on your investment." The offer was tempting, enough to rent a decent place for a year and provide a financial cushion while he sought work. But something felt off about Reynolds' eagerness. "I'm not interested in selling," Jackson said firmly. "I've just moved in." Reynolds' smile tightened. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. This property requires significant renovation to be commercially viable. The cost would far exceed what his eyes flicked to Jackson's worn boots and second-hand jacket, "person in your situation could manage. Our offer is quite generous. Nevertheless, I decline." Reynolds reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "Think it over. Our offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we'll be pursuing other opportunities in Clearwater County." After he left, Jackson examined the card. Clearwater Development Corporation had a Virginia address, a connection that seemed unlikely to be coincidental. Why would an East Coast developer be interested in an abandoned airport in rural Montana? What had changed to make this property suddenly valuable? That night, unable to sleep, Jackson returned to the underground vault. Something about Reynolds' visit had unsettled him. If the airport itself was valuable to developers, why had it sat empty for nearly a decade? What had changed? On impulse, he tried another combination, the date the satellite station had been decommissioned, May 17, 14. The keypad's light remained red. Jackson ran his hand through his hair in frustration. He was missing something. What would a military officer like Blackwood use for a truly secure facility? A memory surfaced from his time working with a former military mechanic on the ranch. Something about the Armed Forces birthday. He quickly searched on his phone, Air Force birthday, September 18, 1947. With renewed hope, he entered 091847. The small light turned green. Something inside the mechanism clicked. Jackson's heart pounded as he pulled the heavy door. Slowly, the vault swung open. The smell hit him first: musty paper, old electronics, metal. His rancher's instincts registered the odor of materials long sealed away from light and fresh air. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw shelves lining the small vault, filled with file folders, data storage devices, and technical manuals. And in the center, on a small desk, sat a single metal container marked with faded Air Force insignia. And a simple label: Operation Starlight, Contingency Protocols, Top Secret. Jackson's hands trembled as he approached it. Operation Starlight. He'd never heard of it. As someone who had grown up near military installations, he understood the potential significance of his discovery. If these were Colonel Blackwood's unofficial files on the security breach, they could contain information never included in the official investigation, possibly even evidence identifying traitors who had evaded justice for decades. Carefully, using the precision ingrained from years of working with delicate engine parts, Jackson opened the metal container. Inside were dozens of folders containing typewritten reports, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be nuclear launch authentication codes and contingency protocols. One document caught his eye, a list of suspected security compromises stamped top secret and dated August 1997. Unlike the official suspects mentioned in news accounts of a minor security breach, this list included names he recognized from his research, prominent defense contractors, including the current CEO of America's largest weapons manufacturer. "My God," Jackson whispered, understanding the implications. Colonel Blackwood had suspected defense industry executives of involvement in the theft of nuclear protocols, perhaps explaining why the case was downplayed and never resolved. As he carefully examined the documents, a folded paper fell from between two folders. Unlike the official military documents, this appeared to be a personal letter handwritten on ordinary paper. It was dated May 28, 1998, the month before Blackwood's reassignment. "Dear Michael," it began. "With my transfer to the Pentagon, Operation Starlight is officially terminated. The department has ordered all files returned to Washington, but I cannot in good conscience surrender the evidence we've gathered implicating Garrison Defense Systems and their operatives within our command structure. Lieutenant Parker died believing we were close to proving their involvement in the theft of the nuclear authentication protocols. His accident only confirms our suspicions. As discussed, these documents must remain sealed. The evidence is compelling but circumstantial, and Garrison's influence extends to the highest levels of government. Perhaps in 30 years, when his protections have faded, the truth can emerge. Until then, I trust your discretion." Dad Jackson sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. Colonel Blackwood had deliberately preserved evidence against a major defense contractor, hiding it in the airport secure room when the official investigation was shut down, perhaps after the suspicious death of another officer. And somehow these files had remained sealed away, forgotten after the station's decommissioning, undisturbed after the airport's closure. The question that burned in Jackson's mind: what had happened to Garrison Defense Systems and those implicated in these documents? As if in answer, he found a newspaper clipping dated 2018. Former Defense Secretary Harold Garrison dies at 92. The obituary described him as a patriot who had served in government before founding Garrison Defense Systems, which he led for 3 decades before retiring to Virginia in 1998. More importantly, it listed his only surviving family member, grandson Victor Garrison, who had returned to government service in 2017 as Deputy Director of Defense Procurement after leading the family company for 20 years. The pieces began to fall into place. Alex Reynolds was likely connected to Victor Garrison, representing a company suddenly interested in acquiring the airport, where evidence of his grandfather's crimes might be hidden. Jackson's protective instinct surged within him. These documents represented crucial evidence in a serious breach of national security, protocols for nuclear launch, authorizations stolen and potentially sold to foreign interests, because powerful men had prioritized profit over country. These files didn't belong hidden away or destroyed to protect reputations. They belonged in the hands of proper authorities who could finally address a decades-old betrayal. As he carefully returned the documents to their container, Jackson heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The main gate of the airport opening. Heavy footsteps echoed through the terminal, approaching the stairs to the underground bay. Jackson froze, his mind racing. It was nearly midnight. No legitimate visitor would arrive unannounced. Quickly, he closed the metal document case and looked for a place to hide it. The vault had a small floor safe embedded in one corner, likely used for the most sensitive materials when the station was operational. He carefully placed the case inside, closed it, then moved to the maintenance bay door. Through the partially open door, He could see two men descending the stairs. One was Alex Reynolds, his expensive suit now replaced with dark practical clothing. The other was a stranger, older, military-bearing, expression grim. "I'm telling you, Director, someone's opened the vault," Reynolds was saying. "The security system registered keypad activation an hour ago." "Then where are the files?" the older man demanded. "You assured me they'd be here undisturbed." "No one knows what they are," Reynolds insisted. "Even if this rancher found them, he wouldn't understand their significance." Jackson's heart hammered in his chest. They knew exactly what the vault contained and had been monitoring the building, waiting for someone to solve the puzzle they couldn't. Now they wanted to ensure whatever was found remained buried forever. Making a split-second decision, Jackson quietly closed the maintenance bay door from inside, turning the key in the lock. The solid click echoed in the confined space. Outside, he heard Reynolds' startled exclamation. "The maintenance bay! It's locked!" Footsteps rushed toward the door, followed by the handle turning vigorously. "We need the key," the director barked. "I have a master set," Reynolds replied. "But it will take time to find the right one." Jackson assessed his situation. The maintenance bay was secure for the moment, but had only one exit. His phone showed no signal in the underground. Levels, thick walls. However, as a practical man who had spent his life working in agricultural facilities, he knew that buildings of this era often had multiple access points for safety purposes. Scanning the room carefully, he noticed a small service hatch near the floor in one corner, partially hidden by a workbench. It would likely lead to emergency access tunnels or utility conduits. He moved the bench aside, revealing a hatch just large enough for a person to crawl through. The rusted hinges protested as he pulled it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that appeared to lead toward the back of the property. Outside the maintenance bay door, he could hear Reynolds trying various keys, getting closer to finding the right one. Jackson grabbed his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the passage. Decades of cobwebs hung from the low ceiling, but the tunnel itself seemed structurally sound. With no other choice, he crawled inside, pulling the small hatch closed. Behind him, the passage was tight and dusty, clearly unused for many years. Jackson moved as quickly as he could, ignoring the spiderwebs that clung to his hair and clothing. Behind him, he heard the maintenance bay door open, followed by Reynolds' curse when he discovered Jackson wasn't inside. The tunnel extended about 50 feet before ending at another small hatch. Jackson pushed it open cautiously, emerging into an overgrown area behind the airport near an old storage shed. From this hidden position, he could see Reynolds and the man he'd called director exiting the main building, flashlights sweeping the property as they searched for him. Jackson remained motionless, barely breathing as they passed within feet of his hiding place. Their voices carried clearly in the night air. "He must have found another way out," Reynolds said, frustration evident in his tone. "Find him," the older man ordered. "And the files. If what my grandfather feared is in that vault, we can't let it resurface now. I've worked too hard rebuilding the garrison name in Washington. What about the development project?" "The development is just a cover," Director Garrison snapped. "My grandfather warned me on his deathbed that the evidence still existed somewhere in the Clearwater facility. With the station decommissioned, I thought it was safe, but clearly we need to be more thorough." Jackson waited until they moved toward the perimeter before slipping away in the opposite direction. With no safe way to return to his apartment and his truck parked conspicuously out front, he needed another option. Frank Donovan had mentioned living just 2 miles away on Ridge Road, moving through fields and staying in shadows. Jackson made his way to Frank's small ranch house. The lights were still on despite the late hour, and Frank answered his gentle knock with surprising alertness. "My goodness, son, what's happened to you?" he exclaimed, taking in Jackson's disheveled appearance. I found what was in the vault, Jackson explained quickly. And now the people who want to keep it hidden are after me. Frank ushered him inside without hesitation, locking the door and drawing the curtains. Tell me everything. As Jackson recounted his discovery and the confrontation that followed, Frank's expression grew increasingly grave. When Jackson mentioned the name Garrison, the older man's face paled. Harold Garrison, Frank whispered. Colonel Blackwood suspected him all along. Syed Garrison's company had backdoor access to military communications, especially the nuclear launch protocols. That's why the breach happened. His grandson is trying to get the airport now, Jackson said. Calling himself Reynolds, Frank nodded grimly. Victor Garrison returned about a year after his grandfather died. Been buying up properties all over the county through shell corporations. Got himself appointed to a defense position in Washington. Everyone thinks he's a patriot continuing his family legacy. We need to get these files to the authorities, Jackson said. But who can we trust? If what I read is true, the Garrisons had influence throughout the military and government. Frank thought for a moment. Sheriff Reeves retired last year. The new sheriff, Diana Lawson, came from the FBI's Montana field office. No connections to the old power structures. If anyone would handle this properly, it's her. Can you call her? I left my phone in the maintenance bay when I escaped. Frank reached for his landline, but before he could dial, headlights swept across the front window. A car was pulling into his driveway. Were you followed? Frank asked sharply. I don't think so. Jackson moved a peek through the curtains. It's a police cruiser. Frank's relief was palpable. That's my granddaughter, Sarah. She's a deputy, works the night shift. The young officer who entered moments later bore a striking resemblance to Frank, though her expression was all business until she recognized Jackson. Mr. Hayes, what are you doing here? She asked, confusion evident. He's in trouble, Sarah, Frank explained. Found some old evidence in the Clearwater vault. Evidence about Operation Starlight. Sarah's professional demeanor instantly intensified. The nuclear protocols breach? That's been classified for nearly 25 years. Not classified, Jackson said. Buried by Harold Garrison and whoever else was involved. Sarah's face hardened. Garrison's grandson is deputy director of defense procurement now. Been pushing hard to digitize old military facilities, starting with decommissioned satellite stations like Clearwater. We need to speak with Sheriff Lawson, Jackson said. But Victor Garrison and someone he called director are looking for. And me. That would be James Garrison, Harold's son, Sarah clarified. Pentagon intelligence director now. Visits from Washington once a month. She reached for her radio. I'll contact the sheriff directly. In the meantime, you're staying here where it's safe. As Sarah stepped outside to make the call, Frank squeezed Jackson's shoulder. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, son. The Garrisons have been untouchable for generations. Their defense contracts built half the military's infrastructure. No one's ever stood up to them and won. I'm not trying to win, Jackson replied. I just want the truth to come out. Our national security was compromised, and the people responsible were never held accountable. When Sarah returned, her expression was grim. Sheriff's on her way. Says to stay put and touch nothing until she arrives. She hesitated. There's something else. Director James Garrison called in a trespassing complaint at the airport 20 minutes ago. Claimed the new owner was harboring stolen government property. 2 patrol units responded. Jackson's blood ran cold. They're trying to get back into the vault while making it look legitimate. Sarah nodded. I bet on it. But here's the thing. Sheriff Lawson is handling this personally. Wouldn't let the regular patrols secure the scene. She's been looking into cold cases since she took office last year. For the first time since discovering the vault, Jackson felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the truth about Operation Starlight. and the theft of nuclear protocols would finally emerge after decades of deliberate concealment. As they waited for the sheriff, Frank prepared coffee, his hands slightly trembling as he set cups on the table. "I always wondered why Colonel Blackwood was so obsessed with security," he mused. He'd spend hours checking and rechecking clearances, refusing to let anyone near certain communications equipment. Said he owed it to the country to be thorough. He was collecting evidence, Jackson realized, using his position as station commander to document details the official investigation might miss or ignore. Sarah leaned forward intently. "If what you found is legitimate evidence connecting the garrisons to selling nuclear protocols, it explains a lot about their continued influence, how the family maintained power for so long, why no one ever challenged them." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Frank said quietly, "especially when national security is at stake." The conversation halted at the sound of another vehicle pulling up. Through the window, they could see a sheriff's department SUV with lights flashing but no siren. A tall woman in uniform approached the door with purposeful strides. Sheriff Diana Lawson was younger than Jackson had expected, perhaps early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. As she entered the room, she nodded to Sarah before turning her attention to Jackson. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you found something significant at the Clearwater property," she said without preamble. Jackson explained his discovery in detail: the vault, the military files, Colonel Blackwood's letter implicating Harold Garrison and his defense company in the theft of nuclear launch protocols, and the current efforts by Garrison's son and grandson to recover or destroy the evidence. The sheriff listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When Jackson finished, Lawson's expression was grave but determined. "I've secured the airport," she said. "2 of my most trusted deputies are guarding the maintenance bay. No one's getting into that vault without my authorization." She fixed Jackson with a direct gaze. "But we need to move quickly. Director, James Garrison has considerable influence. He's already called the Pentagon, claiming this is a matter of national security that belongs under military jurisdiction." "The files don't belong to the Garrisons," Jackson said firmly. "They belong to the American people who deserve to know the truth about a breach of nuclear security protocols that was covered up because powerful men were implicated." Sheriff Lawson nodded. "My thoughts exactly. I need you to take me to the vault. Show me exactly what you found, where it was positioned, everything. We need to document this discovery properly before anyone can interfere." Sarah stepped forward. "I'll escort you both. The Garrisons won't be expecting him to return so soon, especially with law enforcement." As they prepared to leave, Frank took Jackson's hands in his own. "Colonel Blackwood would be grateful to you," he said softly. "He died believing the truth would never come out, that the country would never know how close we came to catastrophe." Jackson squeezed the older man's hands. The truth was just waiting for the right time, for someone who understood its value. Outside, the night had cleared, stars visible above Clearwater County's quiet landscape. As Sheriff Lawson's vehicle moved toward the airport, Jackson felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. In just 4 days, his life had transformed from a desperate search for affordable housing to being at the center of a decades-old national security investigation. He had come to Clearwater seeking only shelter, a place to rebuild his shattered life after losing everything. Instead, he had discovered a truth long buried, one that might finally bring accountability to traitors who had compromised America's most sensitive defense systems and exposed the corrupt foundation upon which a powerful family had built their legacy. The airport loomed ahead, its abandoned control tower stark against the night sky. Police vehicles surrounded the property, their lights casting alternating patterns of red and blue across the chain-link fence. Jackson took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. Some buildings held more than their apparent purpose within their walls. Some held secrets that demanded to be revealed, no matter how long they had waited in darkness. For Jackson Hayes, the journey that had begun in bankruptcy and grief had led to an unexpected purpose, becoming the voice for a truth that could no longer be silenced. As Jackson stepped from Sheriff Lawson's vehicle, his eyes locked on the airport silhouette against the night sky. The property that had represented his last chance at a fresh start now stood at the center of a 25-year-old national security breach investigation. Yellow police tape cordoned off the entrance while uniformed deputies secured the perimeter, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed to hold more than just shadows. "2 of my deputies are inside," Sheriff Lawson explained, guiding Jackson toward the entrance. "I've told them to secure the maintenance bay, but touch nothing until we arrive." Deputy Sarah Donovan flanked Jackson's other side, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "The garrisons have friends throughout the government," she warned. "Word travels fast in Washington." The airport's interior felt different under the harsh beams of police flashlights, less a potential home and more a crime scene. Their footsteps echoed across the concrete floor as they moved toward the maintenance bay stairs. Jackson's heart pounded with each step downward, the temperature dropping as they descended into the space where he had made his discovery. 2 deputies stood at attention outside the maintenance bay, nodding respectfully as Sheriff Lawson approached. "Any disturbances?" Lawson asked. "No, ma'am," the senior deputy replied. "But we've had 3 calls from the Pentagon in the last hour. Director Garrison is claiming this falls under military jurisdiction. Says we're interfering with national security by securing the site. This is my county," Lawson said firmly. "And potential evidence of a crime committed here falls under my jurisdiction until proven otherwise." Inside the maintenance bay, Jackson showed them the vault, still open from his hasty departure. The metal case with Operation Starlight documents remained in the floor safe where he had hidden it. "This is what I found," he explained carefully, removing the case and placing it on a workbench. "Colonel Blackwood's personal records of the 1997 security breach." Sheriff Lawson pulled on evidence gloves before opening the case. As she examined the contents, her expression grew increasingly serious. "These are authentic military documents," she confirmed. "And if what they allege is true, we're looking at treason, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possibly murder." Sarah examined Colonel Blackwood's letter. He specifically names Harold Garrison and mentions a Lieutenant Parker who died in an accident while investigating. "We should look into Parker's death." "Already on it," Lawson nodded. "I've requested the file from military archives. But we need to move these documents to secure storage immediately. The longer they remain here, the greater the risk." As they carefully repacked the evidence, a deputy rushed into the maintenance bay. "Sheriff, we've got a situation. 3 black SUVs just pulled up, government plates. They're demanding immediate access to the site." Lawson's expression hardened. "Tell them this is an active crime scene under county jurisdiction. No one enters without my authorization." "They're claiming national security override," the deputy said. "The lead agent has a document signed by the defense secretary." "Convenient timing," Sarah muttered. "Too convenient," Lawson agreed. "This goes higher than we thought." She turned to Jackson. "We need to get you and this evidence out of here now. There's a back exit through the emergency access tunnels. It comes out behind the old fuel depot." "I know it," Jackson confirmed. "That's how I escaped earlier." "Perfect." Lawson handed the metal case to Sarah. "Deputy Donovan, escort Mr. Hayes and the evidence to my personal vehicle. It's parked behind Hangar B. Take the tunnel and avoid being seen. Drive directly to the county courthouse and secure this in the evidence lockup. I've already alerted Judge Winters. He's waiting to witness the chain of custody. What about you?" Sarah asked. "I'll handle our visitors," Lawson said grimly. "Buy you time to get clear." If these documents are what they appear to be, a lot of powerful people will go to extraordinary lengths to make them disappear. As Jackson and Sarah prepared to leave through the emergency tunnel, Lawson placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "What you've discovered could change history. Mr. Hayes, the truth about Operation Starlight has been buried for too long." Jackson nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "I just wanted a place to start over. I never expected this. Sometimes we don't find our purpose," Lawson replied. "Sometimes it finds us." The emergency tunnel was as dark and cramped as Jackson remembered. He led the way, Sarah following closely behind with the metal case clutched to her chest. They moved silently, conscious of voices echoing from the main level of the airport. "Director Garrison is up there," Sarah whispered. "I recognize his voice from press conferences." "He wants these files destroyed," Jackson replied. "They prove his father and grandfather sold nuclear launch protocols to foreign interests." They reached the exit hatch, pushing it open carefully. The night air felt cool after the stuffiness of the tunnel. In the distance, they could see the flashing lights of the government vehicles by the main entrance. "Sheriff's car is just beyond those bushes," Sarah said. "Stay low and follow me." Moving through shadows, they reached Lawson's unmarked vehicle. Sarah unlocked it and placed the metal case in a hidden compartment beneath the rear seat. "The courthouse is 15 minutes away," she explained, starting the engine. "Judge Winters is a former military prosecutor. He understands the significance of what we found." As they drove away from the airport, Jackson glanced back at the property he had purchased just 4 days earlier. Police lights still flashed at the entrance, silhouetting figures engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. His simple hope for affordable housing had uncovered one of the most significant security breaches in recent American history. Evidence that had remained hidden for 25 years, protected by a military officer who had sacrificed his career to preserve the truth. "Your life is going to change after tonight," Sarah said quietly. "Once these documents are properly secured and authenticated, everything changes. The garrisons, their defense contracts, their political connections, it all comes under scrutiny." Jackson nodded, watching the Montana landscape pass by in darkness. Maybe that's what Colonel Blackwood was counting on. Someone with nothing left to lose, someone who would recognize the importance of what he left behind. The county courthouse stood illuminated against the night sky, its classical architecture a symbol of justice in this small Montana community. Judge Thomas Winters waited on the steps, his expression grave. "Bring it inside quickly," he instructed. As they approached, "I've cleared the building of all personnel except my most trusted clerk. Whatever you've found, I want an unbroken chain of custody documented." In the judge's chambers, Sarah carefully placed the metal case on the desk. "This contains classified documents related to Operation Starlight. Your Honor, evidence of treason and conspiracy at the highest levels of government and defense contracting." Judge Winters, a former colonel himself, examined the documents with practiced efficiency. His expression darkened as he read Colonel Blackwood's letter. "I knew Richard Blackwood," he said finally. "Served with him in the 80s, one of the finest officers I ever met. If he preserved these records at great personal risk, he believed they were vital to national security." The judge looked at Jackson with new respect. "You purchased the airport 4 days ago, Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, sir. It was all I could afford after losing my ranch. And now you've uncovered what may be evidence of the most significant security breach in decades. The Pentagon will fight to bury this again. The Garrison family has tremendous influence. What happens now?" Jackson asked. "I'm declaring these materials evidence in a potential criminal investigation," the judge stated. "They'll be placed in the courthouse vault tonight. Tomorrow, I'll contact the FBI's Public Corruption Unit in Washington. They operate independently from the Pentagon. This needs to be handled at the highest levels by people with no connections to defense contracting." As they completed the Necessary documentation to establish the chain of custody. Sheriff Lawson arrived, looking battle-worn but satisfied. Director Garrison is furious, she reported. But I stood my ground on jurisdiction. They're still at the airport, searching the maintenance bay, but the important evidence is here now, secure and properly documented. Judge Winters nodded approvingly. Well done, Sheriff. The Garrisons aren't accustomed to being challenged. They've operated with impunity for too long. What about Mr. Hayes? Sarah asked. He's not safe returning to the airport. Agreed. Lawson said. Director Garrison made it clear they consider you a threat. Mr. Hayes, they're already constructing a narrative claiming you stole classified documents. I have a hunting cabin outside town, Judge Winters offered. Remote, defensible, off the grid. Mr. Hayes can stay there until the FBI takes over the investigation. As they finalized arrangements, Jackson found himself reflecting on the remarkable chain of events that had led him to this moment. The loss of his family ranch, a devastating blow that had seemed like the end of his life, had instead directed him to Clearwater, to the abandoned airport, to a vault containing truth that had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Perhaps, he thought, there was a pattern in what had initially appeared to be random devastation. Perhaps his greatest loss had positioned him for his most important discovery. The bankruptcy that had stripped away his former life had led him precisely where he needed to be, to a small Montana county with big secrets, to a forgotten vault containing evidence that would change lives and bring long-delayed justice to a nation that had never received the full truth. Jackson Hayes had come to Clearwater seeking only shelter. He had found purpose instead. Jackson woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, momentarily disoriented by the rustic comfort of Judge Winters' hunting cabin. The events of the previous day crashed back into his consciousness. The vault, the documents, the hasty escape from Clearwater with evidence that had remained hidden for nearly 25 years. A soft knock at the door revealed Sheriff Lawson, already dressed in her uniform despite the early hour. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. There have been developments overnight that you should know about. Over coffee at the cabin's wooden table, Lawson outlined what had transpired while Jackson slept. The FBI had assembled a specialized team working through the night to process and authenticate Colonel Blackwood's meticulously preserved evidence. Simultaneously, agents had begun discreetly investigating the Garrison family's defense contracts, preparing for what would likely become one of the most significant corruption cases in decades. The response has been swift, Lawson said, sliding a tablet across the table to show Jackson a photograph. This is Catherine Parker. She was 9 years old when her father, Lieutenant Robert Parker, died in what was ruled an accident during the original Starlight investigation. She spent her entire adult life trying to prove her father was murdered. The woman in the photograph was in her 30s now, her eyes carrying the determination of someone who had never accepted the official story about her father's death. Jackson felt a profound connection to this stranger, who had lived under the shadow of unanswered questions for decades. She's flying in today, Lawson continued, along with several former military officers who worked with Colonel Blackwood. They want to provide testimony about the original investigation and how it was derailed. And the Garrisons? Jackson asked. Lawson's expression hardened. Director James Garrison filed emergency motions in 3 different courts overnight, attempting to block our investigation and claim ownership of the materials from the vault. Victor Garrison held a press conference in Washington, calling this a politically motivated attack on a patriotic family and claiming the documents were fabricated. That was fast, Jackson observed. They're running scared, Lawson replied. For the first time in 25 years, they don't control the narrative. She paused, which brings me to the reason I'm here so early. We need to get back to Clearwater immediately. The FBI team believes there may be additional evidence hidden at the airport. The drive back to Clearwater felt different in daylight. Jackson watched the landscape change from remote wilderness to rolling ranchland, small towns appearing and disappearing as they traveled. Judge Winters followed in a separate vehicle, coordinating with federal officials by phone to ensure the investigation remained protected from Pentagon interference. Colonel Blackwood's journals mention a secondary storage location, Sheriff Lawson explained as they drove, somewhere he considered even safer than the vault. Based on his cryptic references, the FBI team believes it might be hidden somewhere in the main terminal building. Jackson considered this. The airport has been renovated several times over the years. There could be sealed spaces between walls, under floors. Exactly, Lawson nodded. And as the current owner with mechanical experience, you're uniquely positioned to help us locate it. As they approached Clearwater, Jackson noticed increased activity in the small town. News vans parked in the square. Reporters interviewing. Locals, curious onlookers gathered in small groups discussing the sudden spotlight on their community. The story was breaking faster than anyone had anticipated. The airport itself was now surrounded by federal vehicles. FBI agents and windbreakers had replaced the county deputies, with additional security personnel stationed at all entrances. Across the street, a small group of protesters held signs supporting the Garrison family and condemning the investigation as unpatriotic. Jackson recognized several former military contractors among them, people whose livelihoods likely depended on Garrison defense projects. Inside, the property had been transformed into an active investigation hub. FBI technicians carefully examined every inch of the structure, using ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden spaces within walls and under floors. The maintenance bay vault remained open, its contents now properly documented and mostly removed to secure evidence storage. Frank Donovan had arrived shortly after Jackson, his intimate knowledge of the building's history proving invaluable to investigators. Now in his 70s, Frank moved through the airport with surprising energy, pointing out renovations and alterations made over the decades. The control tower was rewired in 1994, he explained, tapping a wall that sounded slightly hollow. Colonel Blackwood was very specific about how it should be done. Insisted on overseeing the work himself, even though it wasn't technically his jurisdiction. Agent Rachel Carter, the FBI's lead investigator, signaled to a technician who began scanning the wall with specialized equipment. Interesting. Why would Blackwood be so concerned about a simple rewiring? Blackwood was particular about everything, Frank smiled fondly, but especially about communication security. He always said this facility was more important than people realized. The technician looked up from his equipment. There's definitely something behind this wall. A space approximately 3 feet deep, running the height of the room. What followed was a carefully executed excavation. FBI technicians cutting a precise opening in the drywall to reveal what lay behind. As the section of wall was removed, Jackson gasped at what was revealed. A narrow chamber lined with metal shelving containing dozens of electronic storage devices, each labeled with dates corresponding to the Operation Starlight timeline. It's a shadow server room, Agent Carter whispered, awe evident in her voice. Blackwood created his own secure backup for communications that passed through the satellite station. Data that never made it into the official investigation. The equipment held information that sent chills down Jackson's spine. Recorded communications between Pentagon officials and defense contractors. Satellite transmission logs that should have been entered as evidence but mysteriously disappeared. Equipment testing records that match no documented military exercises. Most significantly, there were backup tapes, 7 identical black cartridges, one for each day during the week of the security breach. The missing backup tapes, Carter said, carefully examining one with gloved hands. Every satellite station maintained daily backups according to protocol, but the Clearwater backups for that week were reportedly destroyed in a storage accident. Blackwood must have created duplicates. The tape contents painted a damning picture. Each recording documented unauthorized access to nuclear launch protocols, transmitted through channels connected to Garrison Defense System servers. Not just security codes being compromised, but active attempts to insert false authentication protocols into the military's communication network. This wasn't just about stealing secrets, Jackson realized, the horror of the situation sinking in. They were trying to insert false launch protocols into the system, codes that could have been triggered during a crisis. Creating a backdoor into America's nuclear response capability, Carter added. The perfect leverage for a defense contractor. Proving the existing system was vulnerable would guarantee billions in contracts to create a more secure replacement. As they cataloged the hidden evidence, Sheriff Lawson received an urgent call from her office. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she listened. Director James Garrison was just found dead at his Virginia home, she announced after ending the call. Apparent suicide. Left a note claiming sole responsibility for continuing his father's cover-up and denying his son Victor's involvement in any wrongdoing. Agent Carter's eyes narrowed. Convenient. Too convenient. FBI agents are securing the scene, Lawson continued. But Victor Garrison arrived with his security team before they could complete their initial assessment. They're claiming some materials are classified and protected by executive privilege. The implications were clear. The Garrisons were already constructing their narrative, sacrificing James as the scapegoat to protect the family name and the confising James as the billions in defense contracts that depended on their reputation. The timing was suspicious at best, suggesting a desperate attempt to control a story rapidly spinning beyond their reach. I need to get to Washington, Carter said. If they're tampering with evidence at the death scene, this goes even deeper than we thought. Go, Lawson agreed. My team will continue here. We have more than enough to proceed regardless of what happens with James Garrison's death. As Carter departed, Jackson found himself drawn to a small metal box tucked behind the electronic equipment. Different from the others, more personal in nature. Inside were photographs of Colonel Blackwood and his son Michael as young men, letters between the two, and a handwritten journal with entries spanning decades. The journal revealed the personal cost of the Blackwoods' secret investigation. Richard's wife had left him in 1998, unable to understand his obsession with the security breach. Michael had been passed over for promotion repeatedly, his career stalling as he continued to quietly pursue the Starlight case against his superior's orders. Both men had sacrificed everything: family, career advancement, personal happiness, to preserve evidence they believed would someday protect national security. They never gave up, Jackson said softly, showing the journal to Lawson. Even when it cost them everything. Some truths are worth any price, Lawson replied, her expression solemn. They understood that the evidence they were protecting wasn't just about exposing one security breach. It was about revealing corruption at the heart of the defense industry, about breaking the power of men who believed their profits mattered more than the country's security. By mid-afternoon, the FBI's evidence recovery team had documented and secured the contents of the hidden server room. News of James Garrison's death had broken nationally, with conflicting reports about whether it was suicide or murder. Victor Garrison had appeared briefly before cameras, expressing shock at his father's death and denying any family involvement in the security breach being investigated. Jackson watched the press conference on a tablet, noting the younger Garrison's practiced delivery and carefully constructed statements. This was a man accustomed to controlling narratives, to being believed simply because of his position and family name. But the evidence from the airport told a different story, one of multi-generational corruption and brutal elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. He's good, Sheriff Lawson observed. Sympathetic, dignified, appropriately distressed. If we didn't have the evidence, people would believe him, Jackson finished. Just as they have for decades. The power of position and reputation. Lawson nodded. It's why this case went unsolved for so long. Who would believe that America's most prominent defense contractor was compromising the very security systems they were paid billions to protect? Agent Carter returned from Washington late that evening, her expression thunderous. The scene was contaminated before our agents could properly secure it. Garrison's security team had full access for at least 30 minutes before FBI arrived. Destroying evidence? Lawson asked. Or planting it, Carter replied. Either way, James Garrison's death investigation is already compromised. His body is being transported to Quantico for autopsy, but I'd be surprised if we get a conclusive determination. The pattern was becoming clear. The Garrisons were attempting to contain the damage by offering James as the sacrificial lamb, constructing a narrative where the father alone had taken extreme measures to protect the family legacy while the son remained innocent of wrongdoing. As night approached, Jackson found himself standing in what had once been the airport's small terminal, a quiet space untouched by the bustling investigation. The large windows caught the setting sun, casting golden light across floors where travelers had once waited for flights, including perhaps some who had known the truth about Operation Starlight, but remained silent out of fear or complicity. Frank found him there, the older man's face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with purpose. Agent Carter told me what you found in the hidden server room, he said. All these years, Blackwood was keeping those secrets right under our noses. He preserved the truth when everyone else wanted it buried, Jackson replied. He and his son both sacrificed everything to ensure the country would someday be protected from this kind of breach again. Frank nodded, settling onto a bench beside Jackson. I always wondered why Richard never reconnected with his family after his divorce. Why he became so isolated in his later years. Now I understand. He was carrying a burden too heavy to share. A burden that's finally being lifted, Jackson said. Because of what you helped me discover. No, son, Frank patted Jackson's shoulder. Because you came to Clearwater when you did. Because you had the courage to keep looking when others would have walked away. Richard always said the truth would find its moment. You were meant to be here to find what he left behind. The idea struck Jackson with unexpected force, that his path to Clearwater, seemingly driven by financial desperation and personal tragedy, might have had greater purpose. The foreclosure that had stripped away his former life had led him to this precise place at this precise moment in history, positioning him to uncover truth that had waited patiently for decades to be revealed. Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Carter, who entered the terminal with a tablet in hand. The first authentication results are back from the evidence Blackwood preserved, she announced. Modern technology applied to 25-year-old data. It's remarkable what's possible now that wasn't when these breaches occurred. The results confirmed what the documentary evidence had suggested. Multiple digital signatures recovered from the backup tapes matched Garrison Defense Systems access protocols, directly connecting the company to unauthorized access points where they had claimed never to have had presence. This is definitive, Carter said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine emotion. After 25 years, we can prove who was actually present during the security breach. Not just Harold Garrison's company, but 7 other defense contractors whose names appear in Blackwood's records. Are any still active? Jackson asked. 3, including Victor Garrison's current division. Their digital signatures appear on files accessing the Nuclear Launch Protocol database, just days before the official breach was reported. The implications were staggering. Not only could the original security breach be fully documented, but the subsequent cover-up potentially involving the current generation of defense leadership could be exposed and prosecuted. The carefully constructed Garrison legacy, built on compromising national security and maintained through intimidation, was crumbling under the weight of evidence preserved by two men who had never stopped believing in the importance of protecting America's most sensitive defense systems. As night fell over Clearwater, the airport became the centerpiece of a media frenzy. News vans lined the access road, reporters broadcasting live updates about the operation, starlight files, and the shocking connections to the prominent garrison. Defense empire. The small Montana county that had harbored dark secrets for generations was now exposed in the harsh glare of national attention. Jackson watched from a terminal window as the scene unfolded below. In just 1 week, his life had transformed completely. He had come to Clearwater as a bankrupt rancher seeking affordable property, his future uncertain, his prospects limited by financial ruin. Now he stood at the center of what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant national security breach investigations in recent history. Agent Carter joined him at the window, her face illuminated by the flashing lights of news cameras below. The FBI director called personally. "This investigation is now a top national priority. We're bringing in additional resources, establishing a dedicated task force focused on defense contract corruption." "Because of the garrison connection?" Jackson asked. "Partly," Carter nodded. "But also because the evidence suggests this breach may connect to similar security vulnerabilities created in other military communication systems." Blackwood's notes reference other defense contractors who created comparable backdoors during the same time period. This could be bigger than just Clearwater. The possibility was both horrifying and compelling, that the systematic compromise of nuclear protocols might have inspired similar acts elsewhere, or perhaps been inspired by them. That the corruption centered around garrison defense systems might extend beyond satellite communications, connecting powerful figures across the defense industry in a network of profit and betrayal. "What happens now?" Jackson asked. "Warrants are being prepared for Victor Garrison and executives at 3 other defense contractors. The Attorney General is personally reviewing the case to ensure everything is handled properly. There will be no mistakes, no technicalities that allow them to escape justice." Carter paused, studying Jackson with newfound respect. "None of this would have happened without you. Your decision to buy this airport, your curiosity about the vault, your courage in protecting the evidence when the garrisons came for it. You've changed the course of history for national security." Jackson hadn't thought of it that way. He had been focused on survival, on finding affordable shelter after losing everything. The airport had been a desperate last resort, not a deliberate choice to uncover long-buried secrets. "I was just trying to start over," he said quietly. "To find a place where I could rebuild after losing my ranch." "Sometimes our lowest moments lead us exactly where we need to be," Carter replied. "Your bankruptcy and loss brought you to Clearwater at precisely the moment when those files needed to be found, after the satellite station's decommissioning, but before the airport could be demolished by the garrisons." The observation resonated deeply with Jackson. Throughout his life, he had sought control and stability through his ranching career, his family legacy, his careful financial planning. The foreclosure that followed his parents' death had seemed like the ultimate failure, a complete loss of the security he had worked so hard to build. Yet that very loss had propelled him to Clearwater, to the county auction, to the abandoned airport, where evidence had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Had his life proceeded according to plan, had the drought never come, had their finances remained stable, he would never have found himself in position to uncover the truth about Operation Starlight. Colonel Blackwood spent his life protecting these files, Jackson reflected, sacrificing his own happiness to ensure that truth would someday come to light. He never knew if his efforts would matter in the end. "That's the nature of faith," Frank said, joining them at the window. "Not religious faith necessarily, but faith in country. Faith that doing the right thing matters even when results aren't guaranteed." Richard and Michael believed that truth would eventually find its moment, and you were the moment it was waiting. 4. As the three stood watching the scene below, a convoy of official vehicles pulled up in front of the airport. Agents and FBI windbreakers emerged, followed by officials from the Justice Department. Among them was a composed woman in her 30s, Catherine Parker, the daughter whose father had died investigating the original breach. She asked to see the building, Carter explained, to stand in the place where the truth about her father's death was preserved all these years. Jackson felt a profound connection to this woman who had lived her entire adult life under the shadow of unanswered questions. Without exchanging a word, he understood Catherine's need to see where Colonel Blackwood had kept faith with her family, preserving evidence when official channels had failed. "I'll meet her," Jackson decided. She should know the whole story, not just about the evidence, but about the men who protected it. About Richard and Michael Blackwood, who never forgot what happened to her father. As Jackson descended the stairs to greet Catherine Parker, he felt a sense of purpose unlike anything he had experienced before. The airport that had been his last resort, his desperate attempt at finding affordable property, had become something far more significant, a place of reckoning, of long-delayed justice, of truth finally emerging after decades in darkness. Jackson Hayes had come to Clearwater seeking only shelter. He had found meaning instead. 3 months after the discovery in the Clearwater Regional Airport vault, Jackson Hayes stood in the grand hall of the Justice Department, watching as the Attorney General addressed a room packed with journalists, military officials, and government representatives. The investigation that had begun in a small Montana airport had expanded into one of the most significant national security breach cases in American history. Today we announce indictments against Victor Garrison and executives from 3 other major defense contractors, the Attorney General declared, her voice steady and resolute. These indictments cover the 1997 Operation Starlight breach, as well as conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and fraud charges spanning more than 2 decades. Jackson felt Catherine Parker squeeze his hand as the formal announcement continued. Over the past months, they had formed a bond that transcended ordinary friendship, the finder of truth and the woman who had waited a lifetime to receive it, united by their shared commitment to justice long delayed. We also acknowledge that these indictments would not have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of 2 men, Colonel Richard Blackwood and Lieutenant Michael Blackwood, who preserved critical evidence at great personal cost when official channels failed. Their dedication to national security, and Mr. Jackson Hayes' discovery of their carefully hidden files, has finally exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of our defense systems. The press conference continued with technical details of the investigation, but Jackson found his mind drifting to the remarkable journey of the past 3 months. What had begun with his desperate purchase of an abandoned airport had evolved into something far more profound, a reckoning with buried secrets, a challenge to entrenched power, and ultimately a restoration of integrity to systems meant to protect America's most sensitive security protocols. The weeks following his discovery had been a whirlwind of activity. As the federal investigation expanded, the hidden evidence from the airport had revealed connections to other compromised defense systems across multiple military branches, all bearing similar digital signatures, all somehow linked to contractors. Within the Garrison network of companies, the breach had not been merely a theft of nuclear launch protocols. It had been a systematic creation of backdoor access points within America's defense infrastructure, allowing private contractors to monitor, manipulate, and potentially control critical security systems, while charging billions to secure the very vulnerabilities they had created. More disturbing still were the logs Jackson had found hidden in Blackwood's server room, detailed accounts of military officers who had questioned these systems before being silenced through career destruction, forced retirements, or in cases like Lieutenant Parker's suspicious accidents. For Jackson personally, the aftermath had brought unexpected purpose. His background in mechanical systems and practical problem-solving had made him an invaluable consultant to the investigation, helping analysts understand the physical infrastructure of the satellite station and how it had been compromised. What had begun as a professional courtesy had evolved into a formal position with the Defense Department's newly created Contractor Oversight Division, applying his expertise to evaluating the physical security of military installations nationwide. The airport itself had transformed as well. Rather than the burden he had initially feared, the property had become both his home and the centerpiece of his new life. With the investigation bringing national attention to Clearwater, grants and donations had poured in to restore the historic facility, not just as a working regional airport again, but as a training center for military communication security. A living memorial to the Blackwood's dedication and a testament to the power of truth preserved against overwhelming odds. Catherine Parker's voice pulled him back to the present moment. "They're asking for us." The Attorney General was inviting representatives of the affected military families to join her at the podium, with Jackson included as the discoverer of the evidence. As he moved forward through the crowd, Jackson caught sight of his reflection in a polished marble column, a man transformed from the desperate, bankrupt rancher who had arrived in Clearwater just months earlier. Gone was the uncertainty that had clouded his features after his parents' death and the subsequent financial collapse. In its place was something new: purpose, resolve, and a quiet confidence born from having faced down one of the most powerful defense industry families in the country and emerged victorious. At the podium, Catherine spoke briefly but powerfully about living 25 years with unanswered questions about her father's death. Other representatives shared similar stories: careers destroyed, reputations ruined, lives lost in what had been painted as accidents, but were now revealed as systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth about compromised defense systems. When Jackson's turn came, he spoke not about himself, but about Richard and Michael Blackwood, two patriots who had sacrificed everything to preserve evidence they believed would someday matter. They never knew if their efforts would bear fruit. He said, his voice steady despite the bank of cameras before him. They simply did what was right day after day, year after year, protecting truth at great personal cost. Their faith in America sustained them when results seemed impossible. He paused, looking out at the assembled military families and government officials. In an age of instant gratification, their patience and perseverance stand as a powerful reminder that some truths take time to emerge, that justice, while sometimes delayed, need not be permanently denied if good people refuse to surrender to intimidation and power. After the formal proceedings concluded, Jackson found himself surrounded by military officers, each wanting to share their stories and express gratitude for his role in bringing long-awaited answers. A retired general gripped his hand with surprising strength, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My brother was Colonel Henderson," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 28 years in the Air Force, forced into retirement after questioning the garrison security protocols. For 20 years, I've lived with his reputation tarnished by false accusations of incompetence. Now everyone knows the truth, that he was right all along. Stories like his were repeated throughout the afternoon. Careers destroyed, reputations ruined, and the helpless knowledge that defense contractors were protected by wealth and political influence. The relief of vindication, of truth finally acknowledged, was palpable in every conversation. Agent Carter found Jackson as the crowd began to disperse. "The director wants to speak with you," she said, guiding Jackson toward a private conference room about the next phase. The next phase had been the subject of intense discussion over recent weeks. The evidence from the airport had opened doors to vulnerabilities far beyond the original Operation Starlight breach. Colonel Blackwood's meticulous documentation had revealed patterns connecting compromised systems across decades, suggesting a network of corruption that extended throughout the defense industry. The FBI director, a straightforward woman with decades of military experience, got straight to the point. "Mr. Hayes, your work with our investigation team has been exemplary. Your practical experience with physical systems provides a perspective our cybersecurity experts often lack. We'd like to formalize your position with a special appointment, focusing specifically on physical security vulnerabilities at military installations nationwide." The offer was unexpected but compelling, a chance to apply his practical knowledge to protecting other facilities from the kind of compromise that had been discovered at Clearwater. It wasn't the life Jackson had planned before losing his ranch, but it resonated with the person he had become through his experience at the airport. "I'd be honored," he replied, "but I want to maintain my residence in Clearwater. That airport deserves to be restored, not just for its historical significance, but for what it represents, the power of ordinary people to protect truth even against overwhelming odds." The director nodded approvingly. "Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. We've envisioned the Clearwater facility becoming a regional training center for defense security, a place where military communications officers can learn from the mistakes of the past. Your restoration work on the structure could serve as the foundation for a new approach to physical security training." As Jackson left the Justice Department that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across Washington, D.C. Agent Carter walked beside him, both quiet as they processed the day's events and their implications. "It's remarkable," Carter finally said. 3 months ago, you were a bankrupt rancher buying an abandoned airport because it was all you could afford. Now you're at the center of what will likely be remembered as one of the most significant national security breach investigations in American history." Jackson smiled, thinking of the strange path that had led him to this moment. "Life rarely follows the plans we make," he said. "Sometimes our greatest setbacks lead us precisely where we need to be." "Colonel Blackwood would be pleased," Carter observed. "Not just that the evidence was found, but that his facility will continue serving the country's defense. That feels right somehow." That night, returning to his hotel room, Jackson found Clearwater County transformed by the day's announcements. The indictments against Victor Garrison and his associates had dominated local news, forcing the community to confront uncomfortable truths about its history and the powerful interests that had shaped it for generations. The airport, once an object of curiosity and sometimes derision, now stood as a symbol of integrity, long delayed but finally delivered. Someone had placed an American flag on the front gate, a simple tribute to the Blackwoods who had preserved truth when others sought to bury it. Frank Donovan waited at the airport entrance, his face alight with a mixture of vindication and quiet pride. "I just heard the news on television," he said as Jackson approached. "All those years working alongside Richard, I never knew what he was carrying, what he and Michael were protecting." "They couldn't risk telling anyone," Jackson replied, unlocking the gate and welcoming Frank inside. "Not when the Garrisons had such power, not when the stakes were so high." The interior of the airport had undergone remarkable transformation in 3 months. With grants from historical preservation societies and support from the Defense Department's new security initiative, the facility was being carefully restored to its original functionality while being adapted for its new purpose as both Jackson's residence and a working center for defense security training. The main terminal, where Blackwood had hidden his server behind a false wall, now served as a conference space where security experts could review historical materials. The control tower had been fully renovated and contained state-of-the-art communications equipment for training exercises. Upstairs, Jackson had created a comfortable home in the former manager's apartment, blending the building's utilitarian design with modern comforts. The maintenance bay and vault, where his discovery had begun, were preserved exactly as he had found them, serving as a powerful reminder of how national security had been protected when official channels failed. "I never imagined this place could become something so meaningful," Frank mused, settling into a chair in Jackson's living room. When the station was decommissioned and the airport closed, I thought it would eventually be demolished. Another piece of Clearwater's history lost. Instead, it's become a place where history is preserved and examined, Jackson said, where past security failures can finally be addressed. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Catherine Parker stood on the threshold, having flown back from Washington on the same flight as Jackson. "Just wanted to say good night," she said, her quiet dignity a testament to years spent fighting for her father's vindication, "and to thank you again." In the 3 months since they'd met, Catherine had become not just a friend but a partner. In the investigation, her legal background proving invaluable as the case expanded. Her decision to accept a position with the new Contractor Oversight Division meant she would be spending significant time in Clearwater. As the training facility took shape, "Tomorrow's the big day," Jackson reminded her. The first group of communication. "Security officers arrives for training," Catherine nodded. 25 years after my father questioned those protocols, military officers will finally learn the truth about what happened. There's a symmetry to that I find deeply satisfying. After she departed, Frank studied Jackson with grandfatherly affection. "You found more than justice here," he observed. "You found a new path forward." Jackson couldn't deny it. What had begun as a desperate purchase had evolved into something he could never have anticipated. Not just a home, but a purpose that utilized his practical knowledge in service to national security. "Sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the beginning of something better," he said, thinking of the foreclosure notice that had initially seemed like the end of everything. The next morning, as sunrise illuminated the restored control tower, Jackson stood on the tarmac watching as a military transport plane made its approach. The first contingent of communication officers, 20 men and women selected for specialized training in physical security protocols, would be arriving momentarily. Catherine joined him, professional in a tailored suit but with excitement evident in her eyes. "They're landing at the exact same time my father first arrived at Clearwater," she noted, checking her watch. 7:42 a.m., another one of those symmetries. That makes this feel like completion of a circle. As the plane touched down, Jackson reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. The devastating loss of his parents, the drought that had decimated his ranch, the foreclosure that had seemed like the ultimate failure. Each painful step had positioned him precisely where he needed to be to uncover truth that had waited decades to be revealed. Had any single element been different? Had he found another property? Had he ignored the vault? Had he lacked the courage to stand against the garrisons? Justice might never have come for the military personnel who had been silenced for questioning compromised defense systems. Later that day, after welcoming the officers and giving them a tour of the facility, Jackson retreated to what had once been the airport manager's office. Now his personal workspace, it contained a leather-bound journal that had belonged to Colonel Blackwood. The precise handwriting filled pages with observations about the Starlight breach and the systems that followed. Not just technical details, but his personal struggle with knowledge he could share with no one. One entry from 2001 stood out. Another anniversary of Parker's death today. 4 years since that accident, and still no justice. The Pentagon has officially closed the case, though they use the term ongoing assessment to avoid admitting defeat. Only Michael and I know how thoroughly Garrison has compromised the system. Sometimes I wonder if our efforts will ever matter, if these files I've preserved will ever see the light of day. Faith without evidence is hard to maintain. Year after year, Jackson felt a profound connection to the man who had written those words, a man who had persevered despite having no guarantee his actions would ever make a difference. Richard Blackwood had continued documenting vulnerabilities, preserving evidence, protecting truth long after others had surrendered to the seeming inevitability of the garrison's power. His patient faith had finally been rewarded, though he hadn't lived to see it. The truth he and Michael had protected had emerged at last, bringing answers to families who had waited a lifetime for justice. The defense contractors who had believed themselves untouchable were facing consequences decades in the making. As afternoon light filtered through the newly restored windows, Jackson prepared for the first training session with the military officers. The terminal, once a symbol of abandonment and decay, now bustled with purposeful activity as security experts, analysts, and communication specialists collaborated to ensure the vulnerabilities of the past would never be repeated. Catherine Parker had become a central figure in the program, her intimate knowledge of the case and legal expertise making her an invaluable resource. Now a senior advisor to the Contractor Oversight Division, she had dedicated herself to creating systems that would prevent defense contractors from ever again compromising national security for profit. "I brought coffee," Catherine announced, arriving with a tray of cups from Clearwater's recently opened cafe, one of several new businesses that had appeared as the town experienced unexpected renewal. The national attention brought by the case had transformed Clearwater from a struggling rural community into a place of historical and strategic importance, drawing visitors, researchers, and military personnel from across the country. "Perfect timing," Jackson welcomed her. "The team from the Pentagon is arriving this morning to help us integrate the training program with their new security protocols." As they settled into work, Jackson marveled at how naturally he had adapted to this new role, applying his practical knowledge not to ranching or agriculture, but to ensuring the physical security of defense communication systems. The skills he had developed throughout his life had found unexpected application, bringing meaning to experience that had seemed irrelevant after bankruptcy forced the sale of his family's ranch. By mid-morning, the airport hummed with collaborative energy. In the main terminal, military officers studied the historical breach while developing new safeguards. In the control tower, technicians installed advanced security systems designed to prevent unauthorized access. Throughout the facility, experts in various fields contributed specialized knowledge to a defense initiative designed to protect America's most sensitive communications infrastructure. A call from Agent Carter brought momentous news. "Victor Garrison has agreed to cooperate with prosecutors," she reported. Facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by political allies, he's begun providing information about other compromised systems that we haven't yet discovered. "How extensive is it?" Catherine asked, her voice tense with the implications. "He's implicated 12 other defense contractors," Carter replied, "including 4 currently working on next-generation missile defense systems. This is expanding beyond anything we anticipated." The revelation confirmed what Colonel Blackwood had suspected decades earlier, that the corruption centered around the Garrison defense empire extended far beyond Clearwater, connecting powerful contractors across the industry in a network of mutual protection and shared culpability. The backdoors built into America's defense infrastructure had been merely the visible portion of a deeper system that had operated with impunity for generations. As Jackson shared this update with the training team, he noticed something remarkable in the faces around him. Not just satisfaction at Garrison's cooperation, but a profound sense of vindication for the military officers who had spent decades being told that questioning defense contractors was unpatriotic or dangerous to national security. For the families who had lost loved ones to suspicious accidents when they raised concerns about system vulnerabilities. For everyone who had ever suspected the truth but lacked the evidence to prove it. This moment represented something beyond ordinary justice. It was restoration in its truest sense, not just of buildings or systems, but of faith itself. Faith in the possibility that no corruption, however entrenched, could permanently suppress what was right if enough people refused to surrender to intimidation and influence. That evening, as sunset painted Clearwater's landscape in golden light, Jackson stood on the airport's observation deck, watching the community that had become his home. Children played in the recently renovated town park, while residents occupied newly opened businesses. Shops that had been boarded up months earlier now displayed help wanted signs and fresh paint. The town was healing, not just from the recent revelations about defense corruption, but from decades of economic decline that had slowly corroded its foundations. By confronting the truth about compromised security systems, Clearwater had begun reclaiming its identity from the powerful few who had controlled its narrative for generations. Frank joined Jackson on the deck, his weathered hands cradling a cup of coffee. "Richard would be proud of what this place has become," he said, gazing at the facility that had been his workplace for nearly 4 decades. Michael, too, they protected the truth when no one else would. And now look what's happened. Because of their faith, Jackson nodded, thinking of the men who had sacrificed so much without knowing if their efforts would ever matter. They understood something essential, that truth has value even when its victory isn't guaranteed. That preserving evidence of corruption is worthwhile even without certainty of justice. That integrity will ultimately prevail. A lesson for all of us, Frank agreed, especially in times when power seems insurmountable. As darkness fell over Clearwater, lights illuminated the airport's control tower from within, casting a beacon across the surrounding landscape. The facility that had once represented Jackson's financial rock bottom had transformed into something he could never have imagined: a center for national security, a monument to perseverance, and most unexpectedly, a true home. The bankruptcy that had seemed like the end of his life had instead been a beginning. The desperate purchase that had represented his last financial resort had become the foundation of profound purpose. The abandoned airport that had offered merely affordable property had revealed its true value in the vault, where truth had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Jackson Hayes had come to Clearwater, seeking only a roof over his head after losing everything. What he had found instead was immeasurably more valuable, not just answers to long-buried security breaches, but a community restored, military personnel vindicated, and a personal calling that transcended his former ambitions. Some buildings held more than their apparent purpose within their walls. Some held truths that could transform lives when finally revealed. For Jackson, the journey that had begun in grief and financial ruin had led to an unexpected legacy, becoming the protector of a facility where America's defense systems would be strengthened against the very vulnerabilities he had helped uncover. As stars appeared in the clear Montana sky, Jackson thought of Colonel Blackwood's journal entry, questioning if his efforts would ever matter. If Richard could see the airport now, alive with purpose, filled with dedicated officers committed to securing the nation's most sensitive communications, a beacon of integrity for those who had waited generations for answers, he would know with certainty that his faith had not been in vain. Some discoveries change more than history. Some transform the discoverer, the community, and the very nature of what security means in a world where profit too often prevails over protection. The abandoned airport and its hidden vault had offered precisely such a discovery, a reminder that no truth, however deeply buried, is beyond reaching when the right person arrives at the right moment to uncover what others have fought to conceal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.